this is a massive movement, and it's also already arrived for things like article creation. So I think that's really important. Don't see this as, oh, it's somewhere in the future. If you want to engage with it right now, it will give you value right now.
Welcome to Survey Booker Sessions. Tune in to hear from people working in a range of industries and roles to provide you ideas that you can take away and use in your own business. I'm your host, Matt Nally, the founder and director of Survey Booker, which is the leading CRM and survey management system for surveyors. In today's episode, we take a look at how you can make your business stand out by better explaining what you offer customers. And here to tell us all about that is Patrick, who's the co-founder at TrueGroup. So thanks for coming on today.
Oh no, it's a pleasure. It's great to see you, Matt. It's always good to have an excuse to chat with you, isn't it? So
definitely. Unfortunately, not over a beer this one.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, and it's an excuse to be inside in the warm today because my God, it's cold out there.
Yeah, it got really, really cold. I suppose it's always interesting talking about marketing. We've talked about it quite a few times, but I suppose before we start, for everybody else, how did you get into marketing, and what is it that excites you about it?
How did I accidentally end up with a marketing agency? Yeah. Well, I guess I came at it from the tech backwards. So I started, and I think this is something a lot of surveyors are probably seeing now, the integration of Matterports and the equivalent scans, etc. But I was fascinated by that. I used to, a completely property background. I was a development manager. I was building client houses for them. But I was really interested in how the tech might be able to make that more seamless or improve the journey. And one of the things that came out of that was a product that fairly obviously lent itself to marketing schemes off plan. So we started by using it as part of the development process, and you just couldn't help. It was too obvious. I was like, well, if we've modeled this before we've built it, surely that'd be a great way of selling it. So we started actually selling in with other agencies, and they were doing the marketing package. But my business partner had a video production company for years before and had quite a lot of experience there. And we just kept approaching this with the same strategy. It was like, well, yes, we do these 3D tours back then. That was our thing then. But why is that strategically useful for you? And then clients went, well, that approach is what we actually need to our marketing. Do you fancy having a look at this and having a look at this? And it sort of broadened. And 7 years later, yeah, we're a digital marketing agency where VR and 3D is a sort of piece of the puzzle, but it's all about explaining and just being really focused. Who is our customer? Are we reaching them? And is the message then connecting with them? I mean, it's so simple, and it's very easy, I think, particularly with digital, to lose that. You can lose that in this is what's possible and forget this is what's working, really accurately working. And so you've got to always try and filter that, fact check it yourself, and think, well, yeah, this is really cool, but has it made it faster, more streamlined, etc. As soon as we started having those big conversations, I just fell in love with the process. I love that idea of improving efficiency. I suppose in a funny way, it's the efficiency of marketing that I most enjoy. So how are we going to put this together? And yeah, there are loads of options, but which are the best, and how do we join them so they're not running in isolation, and as a result have this sort of cohesive thing with feedback. And the best thing about marketing now is all the feedback you can have. So much data, right? I mean, you're much more, you're closer to that even than I am, but so much data available, and that presents its own challenge. You've got to filter that data and make sure you're running some kind of sensible analysis against it. But once you've done that task, you can literally watch and see whether it works, right? Which is powerful.
It's an interesting theme that comes up generally, actually, across everything, whether it's marketing or sales or security, whatever, like data. And without it, you don't really actually understand what you're doing, do you?
No, and I think we're looking at a world that I think we will see AI moving into model or having a new industry in models as a service. So AI's ability to grab stuff from that data for you will be really powerful. And as you say, there are so many themes of threads of data. How do we start to aggregate them? And I also think that companies who have access to unique streams of data, as opposed to the wider Google picture, they're the ones that will have real value in the future too. It'd be interesting to see that evolve.
It might be interesting to touch actually later on opportunities about how AI might help in the marketing process with things like ChatGPT coming up and writing it all for you. But I suppose before you can come on to the sort of clever bits with the AI or coming up with a strategy or the content you're going to produce, one thing that you've always mentioned to me is I suppose the why. Why do you do something, or explaining why you're doing something for someone? What's the value?
Yeah.
How do you go about that?
This is me. This is me. This is Simon Sinek, who I'm sure few people watching this will have heard of and seen. But if not, go and look up his talks on YouTube. They're all brilliant. He's a very insightful guy. But he like a load of people, I watched that video where he explained Apple's ethos backwards from why, and the penny drops as to how much more impact it has. So then it becomes a question of, well, I'm a surveyor. How's that relevant for me? And I actually found that, but sort of doing a bit of thinking ahead of this, and it challenges that, because we're not trying to get people to buy into an ethos or a lifestyle here, right? This is a practical service as part generally of buying a house, and most often as part of a requirement from a mortgage. So now you need to reflect on, okay, but it still has it. What is the purpose of it? Well, the mortgage companies have made it compulsory because it's a protection. So the reason they're here is to protect, right? And how can you, emphatically make clear how your service is helping that protection exist? But it's also, you are often seen as a part of a process. So how do you best integrate with that process and make it as seamless as possible? I think that's an important part of this. How can you make the journey through as easy as possible? Because I think when you're in the industry, property transactions happen all the time and you become very au fait with it naturally. For most people, buying a house is once, twice, maybe 3 times in a lifetime, that True. This is going to happen. So this process is completely alien to them. And loads of the implied or inherent things that you're like, well, of course, we do that, actually might not be so obvious. And it could be quite simple. It could be stunningly obvious. As I sort of alluded to earlier, often I think the opportunities of digital marketing can muddy the waters of, but this is still a simple exercise. Who are we talking to, and why am I providing them a benefit? So it's not so much, what our reason to exist, as Apple would, looking into the sky, but nevertheless, why is this a benefit? Just being clear with yourself on that, thinking, okay, and maybe at that moment it's also a good point for you to think, okay, I wonder if I'm actually doing the best job of that as well. Sometimes you realize that as you look at it, think, well, actually, maybe I could be integrated with that guy and it would help them. And therein lies your little USP comes out of that process sometimes.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I suppose, is there an importance then, do you think, in surveying for branding versus marketing? Because there's still the element, I suppose, of first impressions when you go onto a website or when you get that email through. So I suppose that they're still tied together, or?
They are, but I'm not a big, my business partner will hate me say this, I'm not a big brand advocate beyond consistent application. So professionalism, that's really important here. And you appearing like a professional entity who have carefully put something together, yes, really, really important. Whether it's that shade of blue or pink, I really don't think that is as relevant here. So it's about what is your brand doing for you in this scenario? Again, they're not, although you will have some repeat customers, a lot of these people might repeat, but, miles apart. So we're not growing the community in that way. We're growing this instant feeling of, oh, yeah, okay, they're slick. It's all well organized. It's laid out nicely. And one of the biggest things that often is lumped into the branding process, but really it's just about good approach, is how to lay something out on a page. And I think graphic design, for me, all of the power of our graphic design team, the thing I love most about working with them is that I'll send them a page, they'll send back the same content and it'll look good. And you think, how did they've just rearranged it on the page, but just by giving it a bit of space or some balance, or sometimes it's deliberate asymmetry, sometimes it's symmetry, but whatever, that eye for how to lay something out, I think that has a real impact. And it's about that initial, as you say, that initial impression. But I don't think you have to stress so much about the logo or the specific color. It's about applying it, being consistent, being rigorous with that. And that's not easy when you've got different platforms that you might be using, by the way. And it's the devil is in the detail, because what happens when you access it on a 3-year-old Samsung device or whatever, those little things that are challenging. And that's where quite a few of the big, web companies, Squarespace, Wixes, those sorts of things are actually really useful, because of course they're helping protect it. But so I think brand is important, but in a different way. It's about just somebody comes on, they land and it go, cool, slick, professional, easy to read is a really key one. Really key.
That's a very interesting point you made there, because I suppose coming into this thought very much it's all about exactly what you're saying, but I suppose how you say it as well, in terms of layout's important, because we've looked at, I suppose, a number of different emails that get sent out by surveyors, not through SurveyBooker, but through a study we did a couple of years ago to look at lead response times.
Yeah.
And it's very, very interesting that the style of the email that comes through, sometimes it is just a big block of text, and actually those same points laid out much more nicely you'll read, but a big block of text you're going to ignore and go, that's too much, can't be bothered.
No one reads. Well, I think the best marker for this is to think how you would do it. There are exceptions to this rule. I know people that do, but I don't read all the stuff. You have to. That's absolutely paramount. Is that you're getting those key points into short sentences, and that's the hardest part. Is sweating this down, and sometimes being a bit ruthless with some of the subsections, subservices. We do marketing a lot for big developments, and a classic there is they want to tell you all the features of the development. And I completely understand that, right? They've worked really hard working out the best kitchens and the bathrooms and the whole thing. But actually, you dump that great big list onto a page, everybody just goes, I'm switched off. Until they are later in the process, when they're engaged, they're like, oh, and then they read it because they're now like, I'm thinking I might buy this. Really useful. So timing that information is another part, Matt, I'd say. So layout of, I like to think of it as tiering it. You keep the really simple key things up front and then let people dive a bit deeper and then give them more and more and more detail the further in they're going, because they are choosing to click into it by definition because they're interested, I think.
I suppose that ties into a website landing page, for example. So you've got a summary of different bits nicely laid out, and then you can click through to read more about it on another page rather than just hammering every bit of information home on.
It's really tempting. We all want to sell what's so fantastic about ourselves. Of course we do, but it's really difficult to be rigorous about it. But you have to think, if you land on someone else's site who's trying to tell you everything, you just don't receive anything. And so it's better to have at least made a couple of things land. Definitely.
Okay, so talking about I suppose the bit you mentioned a minute ago, people just listing features on a development. I think you said you'd taken a look at some websites before we came on. Were there things that you saw that were kind of to that effect? It was very feature based, or maybe quite same, or I don't know. Were there things that stood out for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is difficult because I think for a lot of surveyors, you're thinking differentiating is tough. We're being asked predominantly to give the same service. So what came away from me is, there's a general tendency, but I don't think I would say that. I did look at sites for surveyors, but I don't actually think it's a surveyor's thing at all. I'd say this is just a general, when you're selling yourselves, tendency to want to tell people what you're doing is good. Of course, right? By the implication of that is that they'll read it, go, oh, that's impressive, and then want to sign up. But actually, again, go back a step. You're somebody who very rarely engages with this industry, certainly in any level of detail. You're just trying to buy a house. You just want the surety of knowing someone's going to give you something reliable, and that they're going to be effective at delivering that as part of the mortgage process. They're going to protect you. Right? So that's what you're worried about. So much more powerful to tell them what they get from your service than to tell them the features that you're hoping will imply they get it. Of course, and that logic is one we see all the time, but it doesn't actually translate. They just see features and they think, cool, and that's getting worse with scamming. I mean, it's just getting more techno and more, and actually those tools are great and using them is great, but all they're doing is protecting the quality of that survey or the reusability or the referencing back to it. And so we need to flip it around and be really focused on what do they get from it. And again, I'm not saying there isn't space for some of the features. I'm saying strip it back, pare it back as the welcome point, and then you can go into more detail once they're invested in it or they're on a call with you. Much the best way to tell them about it, because you will naturally explain it differently when you're talking to them.
Yeah, and you can build up trust in a different way to text on a page or an email would go out. And we always advocate that a website that's written well, or the initial email that goes out, is important. It buys you time. It gives an initial first impression of what you're going to offer. But that call is always going to be much, much more powerful. And that will be
and this is interesting because I love what SurveyBooker is doing. I think to a huge extent it does the lifting for this process of feeling professional. So there's something about receiving instant notifications or emails where, as you said, the content of that email, of Of course, it needs to be thought about. But the fact that you have received one so immediately, that is speaking volumes for you. And then it's triggering you to get on the phone call. And the people by people in any sector and anywhere in life, that personal connection will be the moment where you can really push it over. But that I don't want that to then take away from the power of having these touch points, because what they're doing is making you think, crikey, these guys are on it. And that's what you want to think about any service you buy, right? You want people to just come across as really slick, really pro, because you just think this is great. It gives you that instant comfort.
Yeah, definitely. How do you think on a website surveyors can, I suppose, differentiate themselves? Because I suppose let's take home surveys as an example. Level 2s, level 3s, they're, I suppose, minimum standards, but from a consumer perspective, they're the same thing. From, if I go to you or Joe Blogs down the road, they should be in theory the same report. Of course, the reality is people offer like above and beyond a minimum. But how do you communicate that? Because I find often you can go onto a website and it provides the same general description of what a level 2 or a level 3 or evaluation is. And maybe it provides again the features like we carry X tool with us or Y tool with us, but it doesn't necessarily sort of clearly explain to a consumer what the value of that is. How does a surveying firm go about understanding how to sort of market that their difference, their value or value add?
I think you've answered it in your own question by saying their list of the features are not necessarily why that's a value. So flip that around. Start explaining why other things may be of value to you and what could be happening if you don't get that survey. Even acknowledging that that's a minimum standard. This is a minimum standard, guys. Yeah, great. But actually, don't you want to know that your house is mint? Well, then there are other things you could be doing that make sure you understand that. I would also add something else, which is less about explaining the quality of service and more about generally my perception of one of the ways you'll bring people in. And it goes back to that ease of access, ease of engagement, and also give people what they want at the right stages. So, for example, and we've had this conversation before, contact form, a quote form that's actually a contact form. Oh, it's so annoying. Like, just don't do it. Just don't do it. If you don't want to, if you want them to contact you, don't call it get a quote and send them to a thing. Just say, reach out, I'm available on the phone. Make yourself available. But don't do that because you're just adding a layer. I would strongly urge people to sometimes be brave about showing pricing and that it's okay to have a range. But this is something we're also seeing generationally. So one of the studies that we digested sort of 18 months ago now, that really profound insight is the way that different generations want to engage. And the younger you get, the more they want to be able to get the information without talking to you. And I'm stripping a whole study down to real generalization, but basically the older you get, the more likely they are to ring you, email you, anonymous chatbot online. These are the layers that you're going through. This is not this service doesn't really need the sort of detail of asking chatbot questions, but I think a lot of people are just trying to get a feel for the price quickly. You can't blame them. That is the first thing. They've been told they need a survey. So that at this point, they're not even remotely engaged with what it might do for them, probably. You've got to work hard to explain exactly that in a minute. They're probably just looking for a quote. So if you can give them even a range, even a ballpark, you'll probably find that people are grateful to that. But also, if you're going to give them a quote, take the time to work out some sliders or something for them to choose what the features are of their house and give them something that's reasonably accurate, that you get a lot of reward for that. And the ability to quickly book things directly online. So anything you could do, and that's why, without blowing smoke, but that is exactly why I could see value in what you were building for people, Matt, because it was like, oh yeah, brilliant. You could just put this plugin on and people would be able to do the thing they just want to go on. Oh yeah, he's got what I need. Book, bang, it's done. A text message, I'm on my think, oh, wonderful. I think that would sell more than any feature list converted to a Y ever could. Just pure ease would sell me. I'd be like, oh, this is brilliant. Oh, I can see when he's available. I'm available. But, anything you could do to make that process easy, remove the barriers is a no-brainer.
It's interesting you say that. So for me, that segues nicely into a talk about the data side of marketing. So some firms, and I don't think there's necessarily a right or wrong way, but some firms, when they put their price online, they'll just have a fee scale that's public. which is fine, in terms of I can go straight on. I don't have to fill any details in. I can just see property price of this much. My job will be this much. I suppose what you lose there is the ability to then follow up with that customer. You can't provide any additional information if they haven't already worked it out from your website as to why your fee is that level. Why is it that high?
Yeah.
Are there types of things people should look to, I suppose, capture?
So this is interesting because I think as much as I am pro pricing, I'm even more pro the idea of giving a few questions to get your price. I don't think people mind that. And at that point, exactly, you've got an opportunity on the way there to actually say, you can do what is this feature? Why would I add it? And these could be some of the benefits of your particular service. And this is an opportunity to do the why, but you're doing it through the quoting process. It's quite probably a repeat of some of the stuff if they've chosen to read the marketing material. I'm not suggesting this is a whole other thing you need to write. I think you could absolutely duplicate the core bit of why is this useful. But I think you're absolutely right. You do want to demonstrate value. If you are a premium, why is it a premium here? Or if you're not, what enables you to be able to do this so quickly, so cost effectively? Oh, because you've got this tool. Well, that's great too. People would be equally sold potentially either way, depending on what they're looking for. But I absolutely think therein lies good value in investing in that quote building system, however you'd like to achieve it, to get a few details from them. I'm on the fence about the efficacy of the follow-up email. It certainly can work. You get that classic, if you're shopping online or you forgot something in your cart and you think, how did you get my email address? But it ultimately, the stats suggest that after a couple of emails, if people were vaguely interested and they just got bored halfway through, it will get them over the line. So I think you'd have to just watch the data. It would tell you on that particular niche. But fundamentally, I absolutely agree. I think you should be trying to get people to engage with your quote a little bit, not just house value, here it is, because you have exactly right. You've given them the opportunity to read it and sod off next door and tell him to beat the quote rather than get them to buy into you just a little bit.
Interesting. Yeah. I suppose if you're if someone was to come to you as an agency and go, look, we want to revamp our marketing strategy, we want to look at how we change our communications and how we put it out there. What's the type of process you would go through to help people, I suppose, understand their message and determine what's the best, I suppose, marketing routes, whether that's a pay-per-click campaign or a leaflet or an email?
I mean, it's almost sort of obvious, really, in that a lot of it is research-based. We've built questionnaires, so we've got ways of almost helping people define the brand for themselves. There's all sorts of interesting psychological backdrops to this, but you choose certain words and actually they're generally associated with colours for us as people. So we've built that whole system out, and that's great. You can come through and answer those questionnaires, and that will help sort of look and feel. But ultimately, I think the one thing we haven't talked about yet that would come out of that process is the content, right? Content is king, and it's tough, and it's particularly tough as individuals. And, we've just mentioned earlier about AI. How will that impact it? How is it already impacting it? Because it's already available to you. But also, is there value in that? And, look, here we are creating content right now, podcasts supporting that network. It's really important. It's also really tough as a solopreneur to work out how you're going to balance all of those sorts of things. So I think a big part of it for us is we'd start with the really core bit. Have we understood why your particular service is important? And let's get that boiled down and make sure we're talking from the customer's perspective. So we start there. Then we're looking at who is the customer, where is the customer? So step two, what channels are they going to be best reached on? And there's loads of potential here for SEO, and we know this is the sort of thing people are searching. So how are we going to be good at that? And it provides its own set of deliverables here. And then the final thing is that messaging. How are we going to connect with them? And I've sort of struggled with this because I don't want to suggest that every selling firm out there needs to be producing reams of content. I don't think that's realistic, and vast majority of it probably could be the similar thing. But I think all of them would benefit from having their own take on it. So you mentioned a lot of them tend to regurgitate particular RICS piece. It's like, oh, come on, let's make our piece, explain it in our way. Because again, inherently, people by people, they're seeing your approach, they're getting an opportunity to buy into it. So it may be just a small set of frequently asked questions that you bother to make the content for, and that for lots of small firms that would be great, but you've made your version of it, you've explained it in plain English, you've allowed people therefore to buy into your philosophy subliminally, and of course you will help SEO because you'll have a bunch of those keywords in it, which is of real value. So I think that's kind of the three core stages. There's detail that goes into it, and ultimately the reason a lot of people hire us is to go and do the research because it's time consuming and you have to go and work out some of these things. But it's completely possible to sit down yourself and just get stuck in and come out with something. And often the answer is the obvious one that you kind of knew. So it's okay. It's okay to be like, come on, I know that. So then you're just thinking, okay, well, if I was searching, what are those challenges? And reflect on this fact that for so many people, it's not a process they do all the time. They wouldn't understand, what the crack in the wall might mean, or what the block thing could actually, what could be the implication of that. So it's okay to kind of explain it in really simple, plain English type thing.
Yeah, I suppose it's easy to forget with any job what you know now that really wasn't obvious at all to you before. I mean, I forget it sometimes talking about the tech side of things. You start very quickly using terminology that is very obvious to you, and you completely forget someone else is looking at you going, "I've no idea." Come on, put the hand up.
What did he just say about React JS and da da da? Yeah, no, lost, gone.
Is it something that should be done? Re-reviewed regularly, but does the message need to change?
Okay, so there's a sort of yes and no then. So I've been really quick to say yes it is, but I don't think you need to completely unpick the whole story regularly, because that would be just time. It's okay to be like, look, we've made these are the foundations, so it's well worth taking the time. If you haven't already done it and you've been in business, well, go back at half a step, and it's really worth taking the time and giving yourself some foundations of why I'm going to provide value to a client. And then from there, it's more about, are those content messages, are they worth reviewing more often? So those frequently asked questions, are we seeing others coming in? Just being open and aware to shifts, trends, changes. Often the best thing is just something that comes up in the news. We've got the potential house crisis. Let's say it's not that. House price dips at the moment. So what might somebody who's looking for a survey, what new nervousness might they have associated with that? Is there anything that I do that would help give the comfort there? Perfect example. It's likely to be searched. It's likely to be part of their process. So I'd say it's regular reviewing of whether that you're giving something that feels on trend there, but don't feel you need to unpick the whole strategy again and again. Yes, it's healthy to have those reviews, but I'm struggle to even say annually. It's okay to commit to this is my philosophy, my approach, my way of value, and to be focused more on those messages for regular updates.
Yeah, it's interesting, and then you can just tweak based on what's going on in the market or what you've seen a competitors doing, or in terms of have they adjusted their messaging based on what they've seen you doing. Just
absolutely. And I think from COVID to we're always seeing there's always something, so there's always an opportunity to say something about it, and that just keeps you current. And it also, even for a minimum amount of effort, can keep you up in the SEO and those sorts of things in the local area. And I think local and community is an important part of this. Generally, people all want to engage with somebody local because it's just going to be a much easier service to get as a result. So it may be a slightly more localized trend too. It's okay to think of it that way. But just keeping an ear out, and then potentially use an AI to help you write these articles, because I tell you, they are amazing. And
I was going to ask you what are the opportunities that at the moment, whether it's tech based or not, that help people produce more marketing content. The AI is probably
to the point where we are the beta stage with our own platform that's leaning into this change. That's for social media content for brands, but this is a massive movement, and it's also already arrived for things like article creation. So I think that's really important. Don't see this as it's somewhere in the future. If you want to engage with it right now, it can give you value right now. We've got what is it, Hypotenuse and Jeffrey or something, the AI
Jasper.
guys. Jasper, there you go, thank you.
Yeah.
And a few others. I make no advocacy of a particular one versus another. They are, when you do a little quick sort of read into them, some of them are slightly better at articles and the other one's slightly better at this. But what I would say basically is they are a godsend to a time poor, whether you're a small surveying firm or an individual. It's brilliant because you know the gist of the article that you think would be helpful, right? Let's take this analysis of house price dips. You've thought of something, you think, yeah, well, that's my take that would help you. Great. So you've got the gist. Sitting down and massing out an article in a nice form with some keywords in it is a whole other process. This will spit that out for you. In my experience, it's not perfect. You will then go through and edit it. But writing the gist and editing an article are both time easier, but it's just psychologically easier. It's just hard. It's not drag it out of your brain. You're going, oh yeah, well, I don't quite agree with that. I'm going to just reword that sentence. But it's done the lifting. So I cannot advocate that enough. I think to help support, the first thing I don't want anyone to take away this, oh God, I've got to produce loads of my own personal content. I don't think that's true. But I do think you should have your take on these core themes. And when you need to do something that's more current and updated, there's actually a whole wealth of support available now in AI platforms, and loads of them do free trials. And you could probably bounce around their free trials for a while, and So I don't think it needs to be a big cost to get you going. And I mean, the
I had a look at Jasper.
Is phenomenal.
You're right. It's cool stuff. I had a look at Jasper, and from memory, you put in the sort of the rough idea in the title, and then you say the tone of voice and stuff like that, and then you're right, it spits out a whole article for you, and you keep refining it so it creates more and more different paragraphs. And you're right, you just have to sense check it then, don't you, and check the fact that it's put in. I use it
to mass out all of my ideas now. It's become default. That will mass it out. It's always, what's brilliant is it's still my article, because you're defining which order of priority and things like that. So it's still going to evoke your piece, your why in this, but it's so valuable to help mass out an idea, and then you could go in and cull from it, cut from it, whatever, and reformat it to suit. As I said, I mean, wouldn't it be wonderful if it just wrote it? That's coming. They say they just write it. I think that's overstretching it. What they do, however, is give you this great sort of first draft from which you can take all the bits you like, reorder it, frequently restructure a few sentences just to make it feel more natural to you. But it's a huge change. And psychologically, I think that's a big part of it. It's not just time. It is faster. I don't know, I've not done a literally time side by side, so I don't know how much faster, but it is so much easier. And you can quickly mass out a few ideas. That's probably one of the things that I use it most for, is I'll have an idea, I'll type it in, it'll give me a draft, and I'll leave it, and I come back to it at the end of the month and be like, oh, here it is, pre-formed, I haven't forgotten or lost it on the way. It's quite useful.
I suppose that's actually one other key point, is even with any other marketing content, it's write it and then leave it and come back to it and decide, do you still like it in 2 weeks' time or a month?
I mean, you're not always with a trending topic, but generally I'd say that's a very good philosophy on it. And so, as to your point, going back half a step here to, do you need to constantly review it? No, but regularly, yes, and review the frequently asked questions and think, actually, could I answer that a little bit better now? Because you're right, you will sit with it with time and refine even your own answer to the question, and you might get a nuance to the question that's actually quite helpful for people too. One last piece of killer content is reviews, right? This is a service where review feedback matters. Presenting it really quickly and easily matters. Is a huge part. There will, of course, be referrals will be a part of your business, and that's fantastic. But for anybody who you're going to bring in cold, we've spoken about brand, what's important about looking professional and slick. We've spoken about presenting that message nicely. Those two things are subliminally making me think, okay, I found a decent company here. So far, so good. Now I just really need that little bit of external validation. Oh, look, brilliant. Those guys, he's on my road. Fantastic. Okay. Really, really nice to be able to give, not addresses literally, but regionalized or area localized feedback to people. Really powerful part of this, I would say.
Is there one platform or that's better to use, or Or it's a way of presenting it?
What you get on with. I think way of presenting it, you need to apply that same rigor. I would recommend always having the support of someone visually, like a graphic designer. You don't have to use big agency like us to do that. There's loads of but just having somebody who's taking care of it really does make a difference. And so let them worry about exactly how to lay it out cleanly, calmly, but just having them, even if it's not the best, the platform I would say is definitely about the one that works for you. But of course, Google reviews is the first place you would look, right? Just because Google's SEO then complements it with, and he's got a load of reviews. It's a really obvious first place to look, and it's got this implied, because it's not necessarily fair, trust that it's on Google. It must be real.
Yeah. Interesting. I suppose it's one point you made there about having someone else to do some of that stuff for you is I suppose down to opportunity cost. If you're time poor because you're busy speaking with customers and going out and doing surveys, or you're a marketing department within a bigger firm that's just busy, it can be useful to outsource that. And yes, you have to spend a bit of money, but we're going to give you more value in terms of the quality of the content.
Yeah, so I think the opportunity cost is only part of the story there, because I argue there's a qualitative element to this. So there is for lots of parts of this. I think it's a more straightforward opportunity cost. I could write this, they could help me. It's going to save me time. I could get on with that. For Survey Booker, really obvious opportunity cost, right? These features, okay, I'm going to invest some time up front. I'm going to have to answer a few questions. That's a bit boring, but then, brilliant, I can sit back. That's opportunity cost. I would say for some of this visual thing, there are just some people who have an approach a style. I mean, they just do. And so I don't think even with time, I could recreate things just as nicely as my head of design, for example. That doesn't matter. I could spend 2 days on it. She would make a nicer document. Oh, and by the way, in 5 minutes. Even better. So I'm not saying that there's no opportunity cost benefit to that. There is, but I was saying even if there wasn't, I would argue there's still value in having somebody help you just balance it. And so often for clients, for us, that is just coaching them gently to say a little bit less, and give the page some space to breathe.
More. Which comes back to that layout. Yeah.
Back to the layout, back to the core points and the big list of features. It's like, this is all good stuff, but you need to think about how you're going to take them on the journey, not just whack them with it right at the beginning, because it just overwhelms. We get hit with so much content every day, right? So many forms, so fast paced.
Attention spans are gone. Yeah.
Really tough. You really do need to focus in on, saying less, being really careful about how you put it forward.
Perfect. So I suppose final question: what do you think some of the metrics are that people should consider tracking in order to understand whether their marketing is being effective?
Yeah. Okay. So the challenge I have in answering that is I think it depends on how big of a firm and how sophisticated you are. From a solopreneur up to a big firm, you're going to have a swing of the ability to spend time on this. And it's diminishing rates of return. So the first thing is to engage with it is most of the victory. Once you've started looking, the basic metrics that whatever platform you're using will give you are fantastic. Then, yes, the more you're engaged with this, more sophisticated you get. I can't really tell you that there's a particularly bad question to ask. If you're thinking to ask it, and it will give you an answer. I know that sounds horribly vague, but the key thing is, right, we're getting traffic coming in from Google, affiliates, those sorts of things. Understanding that, where did the source of this traffic come from, is a real basic, powerful one. The dwell time, so did they get that, and or potentially more valuable alongside that is actually their scroll percentage down. And this ties into a really core part of site design, which is your call to action. Where do you need to be putting those and how often? So it's not annoying, but it's there before you've lost them on the scroll. And then, of course, when they come in and they absolutely have integrated with Survey Booker already, you've got your welcome email and your follow-ups. And for those, I think open rates are good. You want to be targeting them. I mean, we target 50% when we're doing our outreach, which is mad, but it is achievable. But the open rate is is often misleading, because Outlook, whenever you scroll down, opens a bloody email. Doesn't mean they've engaged it. So try and be a bit harder on that and be like, no, actually, I need them to have engaged with this in some way, whether that's a click or whatever. But I would say open rate it can be misleading as to how many engagements you're getting. Much
and
more
some block it
interesting
now, don't they, as well?
Exactly. Much more interesting is whether that email actually led back to a conversion, and that you could almost liken it to turnover is vanity and profit is sanity. There's a bit of that about it. You could be so obsessed with getting everybody to look at it. It's like, well, that really doesn't matter unless when they look at it, they actually come back to you. So focus much more on how that email is pulling them back into the funnel than worrying necessarily about everybody opening every single one. Hopefully that helps a bit. Yeah.
No, it makes sense. I agree with that. Don't get too bogged down or worried about getting every metric under the sun. Just get started, and then you can start tracking the basics, and you can always.
No, I mean, my wife is a data analyst, and you could go wild, but they're also the deeper you go, the bigger risk of are you asking the right question, and I would say for most people, the type of buying decision that we're looking at here, and the nature of the people that will be coming in to do it. What's really important to you is where did they come from? That has got to be the number one thing, because you want to work out whether that local magazine worked or whether it's my Google ranking that's getting me my most work, because it can help you double down and refocus on, okay, well, I'm going to put some effort into sponsoring the local rugby team, or I'm not because it did nothing. Whatever those sorts of nuanced decisions are. I think that is really key. Now, the sort of slight tear down. Is my website managing to get people to engage that little bit? Yeah. Again, you could get into sector by sector analysis and where their mouse hovered on the screen, but who's got time? And if you've got a team for doing that, then I'm sure they know what they're looking for, and trust them to help give you those answers.
Very interesting. No, I agree with that. And it's always important to sort of keep reinvesting in what's working well and refining that, and not getting bogged down with loads of other avenues if they're not actually achieving much.
Yeah, do you know what? Actually, there's one that I learned the hard way. Is you see something that's a bad metric and you think, right, how are we going to make that fantastic? Instead of going, right, we'll sack that off. It's the classic one of revising for exams when you were a kid and you spent all the time worrying about the worst subjects. You think, no, hang on, why didn't I just make sure I got the A stars locked in, and we'll come back to French later? So yeah, I think that is a really important one. If something's working, can it work even harder? Could it do even better? First question.
Awesome.
If you've completely reached that potential, fine. Now we'll move on to improving the next thing.
Love that. Thanks for joining us today, Patrick. And if people want to get in touch to discuss marketing ideas, how do they go about it?
Yeah, visit TrueGroup.agency, or you can email hello@TrueGroup.agency.
And I saw on your website something about a rooftop beer garden or something like that on your offices.
Oh yeah, you've been reading our contact page. Yes, if anybody wants our fancy office in Knightsbridge, which we keep purely to impress clients and do no work out of, come. It's overlooking Hyde Park for your benefit exclusively. That is exactly why it exists.
I'll be there soon.
Awesome. Thank you for having me on, and I hope some of that was of value and insight.